Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is the Game Dev Local Podcast where I am your host, Oscar Clark, he, him pronouns, and we are on a podquest to learn everything you wanted to know about game dev but never dared to ask. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew. Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Pleasure to be here, mate. Thank you for having me. So my name is Andrew Wailes, and I'm the CEO of PlaySafeID. And we've built a system by which we can issue one life to users across all games and services. And if anyone's caught cheating, hacking, botting, or being inappropriate to kids, we can give them actual penalties. They can't just create a new account, come back in, and carry on being awful people. Trying to make games as fair, fun, and safe for everyone.
Perfect. And the reason I've asked you to come and talk to me about this is because this is now about to become a really big issue. There are some consequences that are happening. And we've had a fun debate about the whole online safety act, which is now a thing and it's coming into force very shortly. And particularly because it's Ofcom, we are likely to see enforcement more readily than we have historically. So
Yes.
let's kind of paint a picture, because not everybody... I think people will understand esports. People will understand the need to kind of have child safety. I think that's fine. But let's talk a little bit about the history, the context of it. So, I think we've seen an evolution, particularly in recent times, where historically there's been a hysteria around games, particularly about violence. Same hysteria, by the way, which film used to have. We just got
100%.
it all lumped on us. But at the same time, there's always been some level of truth that we've also had to deal with. Toxic environments, I think, that exploded in the early days. I think whether it's fair, it's not. I'm not blaming Xbox in this, but if you think about the early days of Xbox, when we started having headphones on console experiences with first-person shooters, there was an explosion of a fairly toxic climate at the time. I think largely dealt with through community management. But it still, we come back to a regular recurrence about cheating, about authenticity. And so, I mean, why do you think it's particularly become important right now?
So I think that there's been a really interesting evolution over the last 10 to 15 years in regards to gaming becoming more competitive, more serious. I think that it's never been more popular. I think that their game models have evolved and developed. So we now have games as a service. We have more
Yep. Someone should write a
repetitive
book
gameplay
about
mechanics.
that.
Yeah, they probably should. Do you know anyone that would be
Yeah,
good
I
to
don't
do
know.
that?
Yeah.
But everything has a ranked mode. Everything has ladders and
Yeah.
climbing. Everything has retention-based matchmaking now, as opposed to skill-based matchmaking. There's been this huge shift, and with these gameplay mechanics, with the rise of as well streaming and content creation to monetize content,
Yeah.
there's all of these different vectors to why people either get frustrated in games or want to want to cheat. Whether it's to always produce really good content to be able to monetize it, whether it's you're just fed up of getting stuck, or whether it's because you've experienced so many cheaters in so many games so often, you adopt a mentality of I can't beat them, might as well join them.
Well, let's
Yeah.
chuck something at you. I mean, just because I think it's important that we step back occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Is cheating always wrong?
I think that throughout the whole of human history, when
Yeah.
we play a game where there's a social contract, that there are
Yeah.
clearly defined rules in order to give the game meaning and fun, whether that's four guys in a tribe jumping in with a ball to try and wrap a rope around it and calm it down, whether that's fencing, whether it's high jump or track or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There is a social contract that's entered by competitors in order
Yeah.
to give meaning to what's happening. And the moment that somebody cheats in any of these environments, it immediately stirs up an emotional response of
But
this sucks,
where
this
I'm
isn't
going
fair.
to is, I
Yep.
think that I think there's a spectrum.
Mm.
I think that there's a difference between being a cheater
Mm-hmm.
and cheating, if that makes any sense. Where I'm coming from is sometimes the experimentation process, the adaptation, the potential of doing something out of the norm, by some is considered cheating, and by others is part of an expression process. And kind of the reason why I'm going down this line, I mean, this is just because I'm trying to create a spectrum, not necessarily. I'm trying to show
No,
we're
for
not
sure.
just black and white about this. I think there's something about that we've always had this ability to adapt, and through adaptation comes change and innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And to some, that adaptation, breaking that tradition, is a cheat. And that's kind of where I'm coming at with this. Am I making
So,
sense?
yeah, you are. So what I would akin what you're describing is
Yeah.
the full body swimsuits that Olympic swimmers used to wear, right?
Yes.
They've now been, it was an evolution of technology to keep
Yep.
people getting an
Nano
edge. And it got to
fiber,
a point
whatever
that,
it was. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it got to a point that people are like, no, it's actually about the technology, not about the swimmer now. And that's not the point of the Olympics. So that's why they got rid of them. And it's why I don't think we'll ever see another Olympic swimmer really break a world record, because they don't have the technology they used to. It's why in marathon running, the types of shoes that have ridiculous springs in them are unfair and constitute cheating, because the evolution of the shoe got too far. So I think that there are, and it's like with bodybuilding, there's competitions that allow the use of steroids and kind of like push your physique in whatever mechanism you can as far as you can. And then there's purely clean competitions where, so I'm not necessarily saying that it is wrong to cheat. What I'm saying is, in an environment where everybody has said, I'm going to play by this set of rules, and you are using software or hardware to gain a specific unfair advantage over that social contract for the purpose of gain, where no one else has access to that, that's where I think that it's
think that's
unsavory.
the thing that I think there is that tipping point, which is a defined set of criteria that is against an objective that is a social contract. I think that if those combinations,
I think that's a fair sentiment. Yeah.
And I think the reason why I think that's important to distinguish first, before we kind of get into the meat of it, is I think there's something about. I'll give you the idea of EVE Online. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the premise, part of the social contract of EVE Online is that you will be taken advantage of by anyone who can.
Yes.
And you knowingly go into the game. Well, you do nowadays.
I was going to say, if you're a new player, maybe you're not so knowingly going into it. But if you're,
I think it's a tough call. But I think, in general, the legacy of the culture around EVE Online means that it is hard to join that game without having the potential to find out that there are so-called bad actors in that game, but the bad actors is part of the game.
Yeah. And it's the same with Albion Online, and the same with sort of like all kind of like social large guild clan based politics where it comes into its style of things. But again, there is a line between what's okay in terms of foul play being a bit of a dickhead versus what's foul play in terms of cheating and hacking. Well, specifically.
But we can get into further as we go past that line. We start getting into exploitation. Start getting into truly toxic behavior, which is damaging not only to the individuals concerned, but as the whole environment and the whole community. The damage that can be done by these small number of incredibly unpleasant people being incredibly unpleasant. And I'm not just talking about the kind of like the time to Nazi, I mean, which is obviously a thing. I'm thinking more the sort of, in some ways, it's more the undertone that comes with people demonstrating a level of disrespect to the intent of the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Rust, right, like there's so many community servers where, trolling's allowed, where you're allowed to put a massive wooden barricade in front of someone's front door, so they've spent all of this time building a base and now they can't get out.
Yeah.
And there's certain servers where it's not allowed. So I think it's easier to define in smaller, kind of like more community run environments where you can clearly define this is allowed and this isn't allowed. And it also gives a home for people because there's clarity of what's allowed and what isn't allowed. I don't want to deal with this bullshit. I can go here. Or I want to participate in the bullshit. You go here. I think the problem comes when you have, not necessarily where the problem comes, but it's a really interesting thing, right? Because if you look at Counter-Strike and CS2 and Cisco and etc., right, there's been a long call from a portion of the community to have hacker v hacker lobbies and servers and matchmaking because they like cheating. They want to play with other cheaters because they find it fun for whatever reason. And that's not had any credence paid to it. And I agree that there hasn't been any credence paid to it because it's not how the philosophy of the game should be or how it should be played.
It wasn't the intent of the developers,
Exactly. However, there is that community desire, and I can't remember what game it is, but I saw maybe a couple of months ago now. There's a game that's been made, which is a HVH game. It is literally
Yeah.
you can choose what cheats and hacks you want natively as part of the game, as part of like a loadout selection, and I think that's a really interesting social experiment. I imagine it's going to die a really quick death because it's not going to be any fun to play, but
Yeah.
you know, it's
But it might be
interesting.
one of those things that generates a core community. And again, this is kind of why I was asking the question, because I think at some point, if we're going to go into kind of the more legislative side, we should probably start with a kind of more cultural, contextual thing, and mostly to make sure that people know that where we're coming from is a place of we want great games, not that we want to lock things up, if that makes sense.
A hundred
So
percent, and we'll get
yeah,
into more detail in this, but just to kind of jump the gun a little bit, and
mm,
we'll give the whole context and detail. But the interesting thing with the legislation is it isn't actually trying to stop harmful content; it's trying to protect children from harmful content.
absolutely,
So again, it's not about let's have a super safe space for everyone and everyone's going to be punished for there's not going to be thought police. It's just you
yeah,
can't tell a 13-year-old to go kill themselves, and it's now the burden of the
yeah,
game developer to protect the child, as opposed to
yeah.
before it wasn't really their legal responsibility, but now it is.
But I think there's a general principle, which is that somebody telling somebody else to unalive themselves is fundamentally broken, and
Yes,
there needs to be consequences. Or at least the very least for me is you shouldn't be able to say that without being held accountable for that comment.
I think, and I'm not going to say the phrases and stuff because they're all deeply
Yeah,
unpleasant, but as a bit of a trigger warning, because I do need to say a couple of them because this is what
yeah,
this topic of conversation is about,
yeah,
unfortunately. So heads up to anyone that's listening. But death threats, rape threats,
yeah,
all of this kind of like most extreme behavior. CSAM, CC, so
yeah,
sexual offences towards children in various
yeah,
capacities. Nobody disagrees that these are wrong. Nobody disagrees that you shouldn't be able to make a legitimate threat towards raping someone or
yeah,
killing someone or grooming children. Like we all kind of
yeah,
agree, I think, societally that that's kind of off the table. And I know it's a really sensitive topic because people are like, does this infringe on free speech? And
yeah.
it's I don't think it infringes on free speech to
No,
say
of
that you
course it
can't.
doesn't.
I'm
It's
going to
very
come to your
clearly
house and kill your whole
described as
family.
hate speech or various other forms of
Yeah,
inappropriate behavior, which is beyond the credence of what would be considered to be, like you say, free speech
yeah,
or
inciting hatred or
self-expression.
violence
Yeah,
or
exactly.
yeah.
And I think that incitement is kind of fundamentally because that like cause I made the comment about time to Nazi earlier, and that is often a redactive kind of process that people who cannot be bothered to make an actual argument will revert to.
Yeah.
Although there are some circumstances of late where certain individuals are behaving in ways or using language from a certain person, but let's not worry about that
Let's
today.
not get bogged down in
Let's not get bogged down
that.
because we could so easily. So
Very much so.
but I think this is the point, though, isn't it? There is a class of behaviour that is pretty universally clear that is not conducive to a good gaming experience. Okay, and
I
there,
would go as far to say if you extracted someone from an online environment behind an
yeah,
anonymous everything and completely unholdable, like not accountable in
yeah,
any degree, right? If you put them in a pub at
yeah,
11 p.m. having a drink and they turned around and said these things to another person to their face, what would the response be from the person that they're saying
precisely.
to it, the people around them? I think that's the big missing element,
And
right?
this is a known psychological behavior. It's been tested. It's been proven to be a
Yeah,
thing. It's actually the same driver or a very connected driver to road rage. The
yeah,
sense that we feel protected and anonymized, liberate is the wrong word, but it removes a sense of
absolves.
responsibility. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
absolves. But I find this absolutely insane because nothing you say on the internet is actually anonymous.
No, absolutely. There's a big misconception amongst people that
Yeah.
I am completely invisible, or it's just not true.
And I'll give you a very stupid example. Back in the old days, back on dial-up modem era, when I was running a thing called Wireplay, um, we had our email service hacked. So, being part of British Telecom, I got the British Telecom Police, yes, we had British Telecom Police, to go knock on the door of the person who did it. Turned out to be a 14-year-old kid, and his mum won't answer the door. The kid was terrified and was desperate not to be sent to prison. Now, don't get me wrong, we were not going to do that. Um, and this kid volunteered to help do moderation for our community.
Awesome.
Best community manager I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying this example is because quite often these immature or ill-considered behaviors are about a moment of frustration, not about the. I don't want us to necessarily always assume, although the people are like this, not every act of bad behavior is a symptom of that person being intrinsically broken.
Oh, 100%. I mean, this is going way left of field here, but
Yeah,
if you look at psychological literature of antisocial behavior and how that aligns with the creative peaks, particularly amongst males, it's
yeah,
between 17 and 25 is the highest rate of antisocial behavior. And
yeah,
it's also the highest opportunity for entrepreneurship and risk taking in general.
yeah,
And they correlate and overlay absolutely perfectly. It's really, really cool.
yeah,
But the challenge with this then comes opportunity,
yeah,
right? It's those that have healthy opportunity to be able to pursue avenues that go and
yeah.
do really interesting things and take these risks. And
Absolutely.
some are successful and some aren't. It's down to lots of vectors, but they pursue the opportunities. And it's those that don't have the opportunities that turn to antisocial behavior because they're looking for the same climb in status. They just don't have the avenue to do it legitimately, so they do it
Precisely.
illegitimately or they do it amongst bad crowds. And yeah, I think that correlates really well with what you're saying about, there it can come from a moment of frustration, or it can come from, I don't have many opportunities in my life and gaming is my escape, it's my
Yeah,
passion, it's my pastime, it's where my social network and friends are. And I'm not progressing at a rate of, intrinsically deep down in my core, I have a degree of, I want to pursue status and I'm stuck. So maybe that's one of the possible
yeah.
drivers for either pursuing cheating or hacking or exploring the side of things. It's where are the opportunities to me, whether they're legitimate or illegitimate. So
Absolutely. And we should stress that it's not just men that do it. It
no, of
it
course.
is a broad spectrum of people with all sorts of identities. There is no kind of like clean persona out there, and so the reason why I wanted to do this to get us started is to sort of get this base level where we kind of accept that there is a human behavior we don't always like. It's not always conducive to good game experiences. That has casts a shadow across a wider area than just that incident. And so, one of the things you said earlier is we wouldn't do that if we were down the pub,
Mhm.
and we wouldn't do that if we didn't feel. So, I think this is where the principle of having an identity, a transferable identity, becomes really interesting. Now, this has become particularly important for like two, maybe three legislative reasons.
Mhm.
One being obviously the Online Safety Act, which we're going to talk about. The second one I would argue is around the whole kind of data privacy aspect of things, which is a
Mhm.
caveat. The reason I mention that is because, for example, we talked about this the other day. Um, the We can't rely on somebody using a credit card as a reference for their age, and I think there's a consequence. But
Correct.
I think also down to things like the Digital Markets Act and the behaviour we're seeing from Apple and Epic and all that kind of stuff, where I think we're seeing a change in the kind of way that we communicate and identify ourselves. I think there's a whole mix of data concerns where know your customer becomes really important. I
Mhm.
don't think that games should be treated in the same way that gambling is, personally. I think they're different psychological characteristics. I personally don't believe that games is a physiological addiction in the same way as gambling is. Yes, there are behavioral addictions, a different subject, another time. We'll talk about it another day. But this comes down to a problem we have on the internet where how who has the information, who can be trusted with the information to know who you are in such a complex, weird security privacy problem environment. Does
It's
that make
a
sense?
big question. It's a
Big
really,
question.
really big question. I mean,
Yeah.
you wrap it up really succinctly and really nicely, but it's enormous because there's so many moving parts to this.
Yeah.
I mean, let's take it from its grassroots and where the Online Safety Act came from, right? And also where the Digital Services Act, which is the European kind of lighter
Yeah.
version, which
Yeah.
focuses more on search engines and content recommender systems,
Yeah.
basically like social media and stuff like that. But fundamentally, there is too much evidence to show that too many children access pornography from too young an age and the amount of impact that it has on their development
100%.
and their relationships and loads of stuff, right? And you can
Yeah.
clearly see if you read the Act itself or any of the statements by Ofcom, who's the independent regulator in the UK that's now regulating and enforcing the Online Safety Act, or who's regulating it and as of July 24th going to start enforcing it. It's very clear to see that the Act was initially drafted and designed with a clear binary over 18 or under 18 in mind in regards to gambling, pornography, and some of the most serious types of content. If you boil the Act down, it's actually really well intentioned. So it's looking to impose the responsibility of safe systems onto developers. And it's looking to do so to ensure that systems and services are safe by design for children. And it looks to protect children from two things, which is actually four things, but at a high level, it's two. Yeah, it gets silly. So there's harmful content. There's illegal content harms, which is all of your really, really nasty stuff, really bad stuff, terrorist content, etc., etc. And then there's harmful content to children, which is split into three categories. I wish they called them wildly different, but they didn't, so it can be a bit muddling. There's primary priority content, which is the most serious. Then there's priority content, which is serious but not as serious. And then there's NDC, which is kind of like a catch-all for everything else that they don't really talk about. Primary priority content is eating disorder content, suicide content, self-harm content, pornography. I think they're just the four categories. And it's not just content depicting those things. It can be suggesting, promoting, or providing instruction for. And on that, I actually, Ofcom actually did a webinar, an all-day 6-hour thing. And I asked this question to them, like, if a user said to another user, go and unalive yourself or go and physically hurt yourself, does that constitute within your guidelines as suicide or self-harm? And they were like, absolutely. It's content that's generated by a user that can be discovered by another user. So it ticks the user-to-user online services box. So it's within scope there. And it ticks the criteria for that type of content. So primary priority content. Then there's priority content, which is bullying content, abusive content. And basically the sum total is degrees of toxicity. When we look at games, it's how toxic people are. The most toxic people basically fall into primary priority content. The mid-tier fall into priority content. And then people, there's the catch-all of NDC for others. So it's a really well-intentioned thing because basically it's not trying to necessarily stop people from being toxic assholes. It's just trying to make sure that you have to know the actual age of a user. And then you have to ensure that based on their age, and you have to know the actual age through a process called highly effective age assurance. And it's very clearly spelled out what the various options can be. It doesn't suggest what you should use or what can't be. It's very loose in that regard. But you have to know the actual age of a user. And then you have to tailor the experience of that user based on the risk factors. So what are the functionalities that you have that provide risk? And then what are the types of content that they might be at risk of being exposed to? So it's really about if you have 13-year-olds accessing your service, you need to know that they're 13-year-olds, and then you need to make sure that they're separate from types of content that might impact them in this way. But this is the really weird thing that happened is it's so clear that the initial creation of the Act was to do with pornography, right? It's so clear as day. And it's just 18 plus or under 18. And then as the Act has evolved and as it's become more complex and as it needed to rope in social media, as it needed to cover search services, and as it also revolutionarily decided to include all user-to-user internet services, which is literally the whole of the internet, more or less anything that one user can perform any kind of content and be discovered by another. It's nuts. So all forums, all video games that have any kind of multiplayer element where users can direct message, group message, voice chat, all of these fall under scope. They've had to do away with that binary over 18 or under 18 kind of system and have this more contextual. You need to actually know the age of
But
the
this
user
is
and
why
customize
I'm so
experience.
torn, as you know, which is there's part of me completely understands and a kind of a unified approach to these problems makes a lot of sense, but the other part of me feels that it's such an overreach in terms of political kind of control. Arguably, I know I'm being a bit inflammatory in that language, and I don't
No.
quite
It's
mean
it's
it.
a fair stance.
Yeah, but I think there is a risk here where the breadth and reach that's being attempted could potentially completely undermine the positive goals that are intended. That being said, I do think that we've known in games for a long, long time, even back in my old dial-up modem days, we had a system in place with the Metropolitan Police where we had to agree a process. So if child pornography had ever been identified, which thank goodness it never was, we would have a process so our team would not be prosecuted
Mhm.
because it was possession. I think it still is possession, which is the offence. So if one of our community team had discovered something being shared,
You don't
they
want them
would
getting
have been liable.
prosecuted.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So we agreed a process, where they would be able to step away from the machine. A nominated individual would be able to put that content onto a USB. I think it was at the time. I can't really remember, and then that would be communicated to the police, and they would come and deal with it. And then all of our team would walk away from that machine until the police were comfortable that they dealt with it. Like I
Mhm.
say, thank goodness it never happened. But that was the level of protection we had to think about. Now, when I was working with PlayStation, we had an odd circumstance with PlayStation Home where, yes, we could log activities in terms of like apartments, but apartments were private spaces that people could invite each other to.
Yep.
Again, but what is the age rating? Well, the age rating on PlayStation 3 at the time was 89 because that was the maximum age it could be. Now, the US had a rule that no one under 13 could be part of PlayStation Home, which is part of the general principles of COPA at the time as well.
Yep.
The UK, I think, went for 16, and the Japanese team had no age rating minimums. So we had to make sure we built systems in place so that people could not be invited to various apartments in different environments to make sure we complied with the regulations in each of the different spaces. But we also had to make sure that there were mechanisms in place. So if we were alerted, if issues happened, we could be alerted and have evidence trails for them.
Yes.
And this seems to be going even further because we had no system. Even as PlayStation, we had no system at that time
Well,
to
why would you?
know
Because you've
your
never had to
age.
deal with this kind of
Yeah.
problem with this kind of issue and the
But
level
we
of severity
wanted
that
that.
comes with
We
it.
wanted that ability. We tried to find ways to get there. At the time, the only people who had that information were the banks.
Yes. I mean, how long ago was this? What year was this
Oh,
roughly?
2008 is when we designed the systems.
Yeah. So I think that there's, with the evolution of gaming models as well, has
Yeah.
come over the last, God, what, 17 years? Oh, God, I feel
Yeah.
so old now.
You think you're old?
So
Look at this beard. I'm actually 20. No, I'm joking. Yeah.
I thought you were
Yeah.
22, but
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
sorry I was out by 2 years. No, the experiment has been run long enough now with enough negative impact and enough horror stories that I think that there's a general sentiment now that something needs to change, but it needs to change in the right way and be sensitive to data
Yeah.
privacy, to protecting users, to retaining anonymity. Because I don't think people necessarily want to tie their passport to game accounts and social media and to so on and so forth. But they don't want to have scams. They don't want to have bots. They don't want to have cheating in games. They don't want to have predators or pedophiles being able to just create a new account and come straight
Absolutely.
back in and access children again. And it's this trade off, right? But it's how much do we trade off on one side for how much benefit on the other side.
Yeah.
I'll talk about what we're doing and how we're looking to solve this problem later. But because we have this culture of, like you said, even though people aren't truly anonymous online, people want that feeling that there is that degree of
Yeah.
anonymity, that there's that separation between who they are personally and who they are online. But the lacking element, I think, is the accountability portion. And I think that we're seeing this amongst the gamer community at the minute. There's a mass apathy for cheating, and people are desperate for some hope, and they're desperate to be able to play fairly. And we're seeing great support, which is fantastic from the player community. And thank you to all of them for that support. Parents are desperate for their children to be safe. They don't want more parental controls. They don't want more chat logs of their kids' chat history. They don't want more analytics. They just want to know that pedos can't groom their kid. That's their be all and end all. But unfortunately, that's a degree of security that can't be guaranteed or provided by any system or service, because people can just create a new account and come straight back in. So yeah, I think that because this was in 2008 and this was one of kind of like the first kind of instances of this sort of thing being able to happen, because it was a new environment, it was a new experiment that was being run, you didn't have the systems for it. I feel that many of the systems still haven't been put in place, and those that have been put in place are fantastic. I will never slag off anti-cheat, chat detection models, and anything, because they do a great job. The problem is it doesn't matter if they do a great job if people can just create a new account and come straight back in. It's
exactly, and I think there's a whole bunch of things that go with that. So let's take that a bit further. So we're now seeing this kind of like process that's being kind of proposed about know your customer. Now, again, we're going to get fairly soon into sort of one of the reasons that I'm concerned about this particular act. So, for example, if you if you're a game developer and you're trying to set up your systems, you're typically not the retailer. You're typically working through a platform, Apple, Android, Steam, whatever else. Now, for me, it would make sense that the platform, who are the people who are handling the transaction, because I'm resorting to the commercial moment, the point where some transaction is occurring. At that point, the people who have that relationship with the consumer are the platform. But I'm not seeing us holding the platforms to account to do the know your customer. Instead, my understanding of the language is that the developer is being held accountable.
Yes, it's their system and their network. Therefore, they're responsible for designing the system that's safe for children.
But it's not their system and their network. We're generally utilize. I mean, there is aspect of it. I'm being a bit unfair, but generally, we're doing that as a side system off the back of somebody else's account system.
So my understanding is it's wherever the harmful content is created by a user and maybe discovered by another user.
Yeah.
It's the environment that's it's the issue.
Yeah,
so if it was within
you're
Steam
right,
chat,
technically, I'm just highlighting
a
wider issue. And the reason I'm highlighting that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there's responsibility on both sides in practice.
I was going to say, because you can't absolve the developer from not having to create a system that's safe, because then the liability would fall completely on the publisher.
And there are amazing tools out there that lots of big games have been using for years. In fact, we started using some of these went back in the PlayStation era. I think particularly around when they implemented the Pottermore stuff, which happened just before I left. There's some amazing tools that we were utilizing, which will allow us to understand a lot more information about the kind of audience to make sure that we handle that safely. But lots of effort has been done to keep people safe. But obviously, as you say, without the ability to know that that person can't just come in with another ID, that causes issues.
Yeah.
But where I'm coming from here is, and I'm sure we'll get into this, is the number of people who have to hold the information.
100%. This is my biggest concern as a consumer. The idea that I would have to KYC. I mean, let's go back one step, right?
Yeah.
Immaterial of what KYC provider is used. Okay.
Yeah.
Whoever the platform, the developer, the game, the social media company, the whatever, whoever they are, they who sign the contract with the KYC provider become the data controller. Okay.
Yes.
So it then becomes their legal responsibility for that data.
100%.
So you could have 50 platforms, the biggest publishers, the biggest launchers, the biggest everything, right? If they all use the same KYC provider, this still doesn't nullify this problem. You would have to KYC with each and every single one of them, and each of them would be able to connect your account to your face, to your document, to your biometrics, to your personally identifiable information of the most sensitive degree. So you would have to do this with 50 different people if there's not one unified system. So it provides a horrible user experience, first of all.
Absolutely
It
horrible.
provides such an awful security issue. It's not just there's now 50 attack vectors, or not 50 attack vector, but 50 times the volume of attack vectors, because there's now it's an exponential problem.
Experience that any player is using becomes an attack vector.
100%, yeah. And then the phishing side of things, because it's 50 different people, there's 50 different opportunities for you to, again,
and somebody does a pop-up. We are now in the habit of not reading the pop-up and just pressing OK because of the cookie issue, which I still think is one of the biggest disasters of usability we've had.
Such a tick box exercise for legislation that has done nothing but harm user experience and user security. I think 100% agree.
Harm user experience, harm user security, and I think it's harmed the engagement with technology.
Agreed. No, absolutely agreed. And I see this nightmare scenario. I don't want to plug myself, so I'm going to try not to.
We are going to let you plug yourself in a bit.
But
go for it.
But one of the reasons that I started PlaySafeID was because it started as a joke between me and my friends, which was they were fed up with cheating in games. I was fed up with cheating in games. They made the joke to me, go and fix it. And what I wanted to do was come up with a system by which would provide the best user experience to be able to solve these problems that wouldn't share any data to game developers and help keep people anonymized. And, that's one of the reasons I've started on this journey, because I want gamers to verifying yourself sucks. It is crap. Okay.
Yeah.
But we've just tried to make it the least amount of crap and the most secure possible. And that you only have to do this once. And then we can basically verify you in the form of an anonymized random PlaySafeID, which is just a series of numbers and letters across games and services. So no one has access to your personally identifiable information, your documents, your biometrics, etc. In a world where us or someone like us doesn't succeed and become like a de facto gaming digital identity to verify you in this way, to help game studios be compliant and also to provide a better experience for users, the alternative is that players will have to verify themselves with each and every single platform, every developer, everything. And
let's talk about this verification process, because I think maybe people don't understand the depth we're talking about here. So we're basically talking about bank level verification, where
not basically we are. It is that level. Yeah.
So that means that we have to have our passport or our ID. We need to have our phone that is registered to us. We need to be able to have ourselves take a live photo that then
of the document and of yourselves.
The document and of you, that correlates at the back end that those two are the same and
checks the liveness of you to make sure you're a real person, that there's no device injection or image injection, so there's no deep fakes, that there's no manipulation that's going on to the stream or data pipeline.
But this is a massively potentially expensive. I'm worried about you here. No, I'm joking. You know what I'm saying. But this is a relatively expensive process.
Very expensive,
complicated. That's legally accountable.
Yes.
Again, we'll talk a bit PlaySafe in a bit more detail in a bit, but a developer faced with that problem, that seems like a barrier to entry that no indie studio could possibly deal with.
We've had a couple of mobile apps reach out to us in the last week. Me and my CTO just got a conversation with one of them an hour ago, and they're now integrating us because they were looking to basically KYC users, but not actually go through a proper KYC process. They were like, we're going to do this in the best way possible, and we're going to handle this ourselves. And then they realized the implications of that from data security in terms of legislation. So, they were like, oh, well, we'll have the photo of the document, and we'll have the photo of the person, and we'll check it ourselves. And it's just like, they reached out to us because they were like, we realized that was a really, really bad move. Can you handle this for us? And we explained that because of the Onfido SDK that we have and the fact that they do the verification and how all of the process works and their security and their network and their infrastructure. And they were like, this is just such a better way of doing it. Please, can we do it? and we work for free with indies and mid-sized studios, but there are people who are forward thinking about this legislation and this kind of structure that want to do things in the right way. But like you say, the barrier for them to do it is immense. And Ofcom have provided statements which literally say, we don't care how small you are or how big you are. You can't say that this is too expensive or inconvenient. Making sure you protect children is a requirement. And to do this, at every level, you have to have highly effective age assurance in place. So it's a massive hurdle for them.
This is why I think it's a massive overreach by government to require that onto every developer. I think that's a fundamental problem. And I worry, like you described it, I mean, this is my opinion. My opinion is that they have implemented a system that cannot be delivered by a lot of teams. And what's worse is going by previous legislation efforts in this space, where the communication of its necessity has been complicated. Like I say, the Information Commission Office did an amazing job of talking about the AADC, and a year, 2 years, 3 years later, I was still trying to get developers to understand it was a real thing.
Yes. And the number of people that I've spoken to who are like, the Online Safety Act doesn't apply to us because it's UK legislation. That's not true. It applies to any company globally that has users in the UK. They're precisely. It was passed in 2022 and nothing's happened with it. We probably don't have to worry about it. And it's like, no, July 24th, it's just taken this long for Ofcom to deliver. Like, it's so complicated and contextual.
But you know what players are going to do? They are going to put on their VPN to a country that has no
the UK.
Such legislation, or no,
and then they won't have to do the verification. Exactly,
they won't have to do the verification. So
and that's already what's happening with Discord and some of the experiments that they're doing. Yeah,
and that's exactly what I think. And essentially, it feels like by not thinking through how it can be managed by smaller teams, it feels to me like they're making the Great Firewall of China for the UK by mistake. And all it will do is it will damage the UK economy.
I think, like I said at the beginning, I think it's so well-intentioned.
Yeah.
That's not to say that I think that it's good.
By the way, I know
but it's very well-intentioned. No. I think you raise a really good point. And I think you raise a point that, lots of people will be considering. I'm not here to defend the Online Safety Act. It is what it is. But I don't know. It is what it is. It's law, and people have to now do it because the fines are so astronomical.
But this is why I mean, I know I don't do ad type podcasts. This is not an ad type podcast. I have no commercial relationship with you at all. But the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you is because you're eloquent on it and you have a lot of data knowledge. But more importantly, that I kind of like the way you're doing it. The reason I like it is because what you're positioning yourself as is, if you want to be in an esport and be a recognized entity, so you can win these tournaments, then get an ID.
Yeah, basically, if you want to be a legitimate player, if you want to be able to show that you don't cheat in games, you have no intention of cheating in games, and you haven't been caught cheating in games, a PlaySafeID is the mechanism of which you can do that. Whether you're on the esports stage, there's a couple of big games that we're currently integrating with because they have tournaments coming up sort of like within the next 6 months. They're like tens to hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of cash prizes, and they're like, we want to make sure that cheaters can't enter and people who are caught cheating can't come back. Like what happened with the Fortnite lawsuit. Yeah.
But there's a real meaningful, substantial benefit to having an ID that's aspirational rather than mandated, and I'm going to punish you as a
100%.
person who doesn't have it.
100%. One thing that we say to developers that are asking to integrate us or even just curious about what we're doing is it is an optional extra. Do not force this on your players because you will piss your players off. Okay. But if you provide it as that you have a separate set of matchmaking, exactly the same as your existing matchmaking with one additional filter, which is PlaySafeID equals true. you can then give your players the option, if they want to play in an environment that actually keeps cheaters out, that they can participate in this. It's good for casual players that don't have much time. It's good for competitive players that want a BS for experience, and for the esports and like serious scene, it should be mandatory, right?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine like doping scandals in cycling or sport. Imagine if someone could be caught, doping and winning everything. You catch them, and then they come back the next week, but they've had a face transplant, and no one can recognize them, so they're allowed to compete again.
Precisely.
That would be madness. So we're just trying to prevent that. Like, it's accountability. Yeah.
And I think I like the fact that you're combining aspirational drivers with accountability. Because I think that's if we look at, I think the successful efforts to overturn toxicity, that came down to communities saying what their aspirations were about, not just yes, it was about ban people who need to be banned, but it was also about saying this is what this place is.
100%. 100%. I think it comes from both sides, right? It's I think if you have a player base that's predominantly toxic, it's because those people have driven everyone else out. It's not because it's inherently, or maybe there is an element of magnetism to it for, this is a toxic piece of shit space, therefore it attracts those sorts of people. But it certainly pushes other people out. One of the things that I find really, really impressive is what Riot have done, both on their anti-cheat and their moderation side of things. I think that they have done a tremendous job. If you look at I've played League of Legends since the beta. I remember when Heimerdinger was first released, right? Like, I'm an OG.
I have never properly played. I've dabbled occasionally.
And you're a happier, healthier person because of it. It's but yes, mate, the level of toxicity and abuse that it used to be versus nowadays, absolutely. Like, and I was growing up through this. Like, I was a part of that whole ecosystem at that time of the Call of Duty Modern Warfare lobbies, of the early days of League of Legends. Like, it was very much the gaming culture of the time, and you couldn't avoid it or escape it. There weren't the tools, there wasn't the moderation, there wasn't the scalability, there wasn't the evolution yet. But the work that Riot have done, both with Vanguard, which is just a top tier anti-cheat, and the rate at which that they're able to detect and issue and keep their space as clean from cheaters as possible. Not that it's obviously perfect, but no anti-cheat's perfect, but they do a particularly gold star job, I feel. But in terms of the moderation that they provide and how quick they are to catch anything, and being able to issue chat bans or suspensions, or like in League, put you in a lower priority queue. There's nothing worse than being literally sat as an adult on the naughty step for 20 minutes before you're allowed to even queue for the game because they've put you in a timeout. It's such an effective system. And as a result, like me and my mates, we're good to have some banter and stuff in games, but in League, we'll stay absolutely crystal clear because we daren't sit on the naughty step for 20 minutes. We don't want to have the time out. We want to play the game.
Well, it's the impact it has on the rest of the team as well. And I think
100%.
Understanding the social construct that we talked about, but how that directly affects, it's a bit like the Dunbar numbers. If you think about the different Dunbar numbers, the proximity and the number of people you have in a proximate kind of group has a direct effect on the intensity of the relationship as well. And I 100%. Think this is an absolutely key part of that process. So, I mean, again, I'm going to throw this one in because we kind of joked about it when we last spoke about it, which is the irony for me is that if there was one world where a blockchain solution would actually be helpful, this is it. But I don't see that happening. I think that whole process has become a bit too broken and too untrusted.
And I think there's too much distrust amongst players to it, just as a sum total. I don't think if there was a digital identity solution that could solve all of the problems that gamers had, I think the amount of distrust and bullshit that happened in the space, players wouldn't touch it just on principle. So unfortunately,
And so for me, I think this comes down to, I want to see solutions which allow smaller developers to have maybe not no barrier to entry, but less barrier to entry. I want
without a massive new barrier in their way.
Yeah, this is another massive new barrier in the way, which, given, most developers still not even doing data protection impact analysis on their pieces, and they're not necessarily registering their their data structures and stuff like that, let alone this. I mean, it seems to me a massive. So I think there's two reactions that happen if we don't get solutions like you're proposing. One is we get less indie content. Two, we get less diverse content generally. And three, we find people finding other ways to get around the problem, whether that's fake, digital identities, which I am sure will become a thing, or VPNs being used for territories that don't enforce the legislation.
I'm pretty sure that it'd be funny, wouldn't it, in sort of like 5 years' time, if the 100% population of a game was like Zimbabwe or somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Because it's everyone's VPN to the place that's free of it. But that's it's Occam's razor. It's the shortest route. It's the simplest
Yeah.
story. It's like, I'm presented with a problem. What will my workaround be? Gamers are anything but stupid. They will be like, I don't want to do this. What's the solution? $2 on a VPN.
Done. But
Problem
it's
solved.
not just gamers. I mean, if you look at what's happened, and this is not legislation, this is the way that Netflix and Paramount and Disney and all the other subscription services have risen up and demanded less and less share of content for having more and more subscriptions. And what's the result? More piracy.
Yes. I mean, it's exactly what happened with cable in the States,
Yeah.
like a couple of decades ago, right? Like there was one cable, it did very well. Everyone was like, this is amazing. And then you start to have exclusive content to each cable. And then all of a sudden you're paying $220 a month to have, 10 different cable. And then what happened was everyone was priced out of it. So piracy, we're seeing exactly the same cycle. It's just instead of being delivered by cable, it's being delivered by fiber.
Exactly. And so the reason for saying that is I think it's one of the core arguments we need to think about in terms of simplicity. Add to that the usability and the security vectors that we're facing already
100%.
are making a lot of people step away from technology. The negativity that we're seeing because of the phrase enshittification comes to mind. Lots of Mr. Who's Your Boss and various other people who've done some really good breakdowns on this with the way that the ad-driven models have deliberately damaged user experience, and my
Terribly so.
worry, inherently so, and intentionally.
Yes.
And I think this is us playing into that poor user experience, and I don't think that stuff comes without consequence. I think that all inherently damages the ecosystem. It damages our willingness to participate. It damages our willingness to spend money online. And in a time when we're already having economic issues, to add a yet another barrier to one of the most important engines to worldwide economy, the internet, to me is incredibly damaging overall. So I hope that we see improvements in this space. I hope we see platforms and the approaches that teams like you are trying to do, where you're not just trying to create a punishment solution, instead an aspirational solution. To me, I think the more we see of that, the better.
Really appreciate that. No, cannot agree more. For me, it's everything's a trade-off, right? The problem with the ad side of things was there was no benefit to the user. It's all extraction. We're just going to show you as many ads and we're going to put as many mechanisms in place in order to be able to monetize you as much as possible at the cost of your positive experience. That's really at the core of what we're trying, or the opposite
100%.
of what we're trying to do. We're trying to really give legitimate value to players in exchange, and to protect their data, and to make sure that they're secure, and to make sure that they retain their anonymity online, whilst helping studios comply with this. If you just say to players, you have to KYC with us because it's the law, tough or else, horrible experience, absolutely dreadful. Whereas if you say, we work with this company, you can verify with them once, and then you're verified across all games, and we're going to give you an environment where you can play without cheaters if you want to, you're actually providing some value that they actually want in exchange for the friction, and then they're kind of good to go. So it's such a complicated problem, as we've established. There's so many vectors to it, both from security, from policy, from legislation, from user experience to philosophy. There's so many important parts to this, but
But
It's
I
a
think
hard
it goes
problem.
a step further. I think if we do find a positive way to solve this problem, there are some consequential benefits. So the ability to hold people to account for their toxic behavior. Well, I mean, would we have the manosphere, the Tates of this world, being able to get away with their bullshit if they were being held to
Again, this
accountable?
becomes such a political
Yeah,
fine line, right? Because where is the
yeah,
line between the free speech and the hate speech and this kind
yeah,
of area? It's one of the reasons that outside of death threats, rape threats, lying,
yeah,
child
yeah,
grooming, the most extreme stuff, we don't touch the toxicity portion. We
yeah.
rely on great
Well, but
moderation
my
tools
point
like, yeah,
is that it's I'm not thinking about the politics here, but I think it's the ability to be held to accountable makes that make sense. So, for example, where you have untruths being said, knowing that that person said it is a self-limiting factor.
yes, because it's to a central person,
Yeah,
it would help mitigate, like you said, the number of studies, the
yeah,
evidence on this is clear. Like with full accountability comes behaviors that wouldn't happen in an actual
yeah,
social setting. So I think that, yeah, there's a degree of once you bring that accountability, you remove a lot of those behaviors inherently because of the risk that comes with it.
yeah,
My only concern, and it's something that's been mentioned to us by some community members and stuff, is what prevents PlaySafeID in the future deciding to take a political stance or controlling some kind of
yes, and
speech or stuff
that's a
like that,
risk.
because
Yeah,
that's a huge issue. So that's something that we're just like, again, outside of rape threats, death threats, child grooming, like the stuff we can all agree is just fundamentally awful and completely wrong. We don't want to touch anything to do with the necessarily the more
absolutely. And I think
contextual toxicity
this
side.
is a massively important thing, but it also why I think what you're trying to do is so, as in this attitude that you're looking at the benefit of using it rather than the gateway process. The fact that this is why we talked about earlier the need for cheating as being an important factor. I think the rebellion comes from breaking the rules. The rebellion is how we get change. If we are held accountable for everything, will we see positive change flourish? So I think that this is, again, back to your point, this is an incredibly complicated space. There are some incredible positives that can come out of being identifiable, but equally, with great power comes great responsibility, and keeping
100%.
that clean dividing line between self expression and the social contract in a given situation, I think that's going to be key.
There's one correction that I'd make to that because I agree with
Yeah.
absolutely everything. I would swap out identifiable for accountable.
Yeah, that's
I
fair.
think you can remove the identifiable and still have the accountable, and I think that's the right way,
Oh,
especially for the Western world.
and you have mentioned this earlier, but I think maybe not as clearly as this implies. But as I understand it, the way you're taking that is that you're not giving the game teams the source ID of the person. You're giving an anonymized version of that ID, which allows you to retain the and that anonymity and the privacy of the person at the same time as still giving that no KYC power. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. So we do the verification on our platform. It's handled by our partners on Fido, and
Yeah,
because they have amazing tech, they have amazing detection systems. They're an awesome partner. Basically, when the verification is complete, they only notify us if the check was successful. The person is who they say they are, and it's
yeah,
the first and only time that they've seen that person. This is
yeah,
how we're able to only issue one of these PlaySafe IDs to an individual, and how they can't create new ones in the future. But it
yeah,
means that when it hits our systems and our network, you're just a random and anonymized series of numbers and letters.
yeah,
And then we further create a further step when you connect to a game. We don't share the root PlaySafe ID with the game developer. There's a further step of separation as well to stop developers being able to fingerprint users and kind of calculate who they are. So yeah, we've really tried to, because I wanted to build a system that I would want to use in games, and I
yeah,
don't want to share my information with game developers. I don't want to have my information in 50 different places where there's way more vulnerability. I wanted to create a system by which I was essentially anonymous, that I was anonymized, and that my data is safe and secure. So that's what we built, and we're just trying to do this for gamers to make sure that their information is safe and secure, but they're verified and they're accountable. So it's about the
yeah.
accountability not the identifiability. We're separating that away from the PlaySafeID.
I think that's massively important. But I think and I think that ability to still feel anonymized and yet still being accountable is a really positive way to do it.
100%. You don't know it's me. You don't know it's Andrew Wailes that's on this game account.
Yeah.
But if I'm caught cheating or if I'm caught grooming children, I'm out of the pool and I have a penalty. Whether that's a couple of months, whether it's a couple of weeks, or whether it's permanent if you're caught grooming children. There's an actual meaningful you're put on the naughty step, just like Riot does with the 20-minute queue ban. It's what we're doing, but we're just doing it across all games tied to that PlaySafeID.
Absolutely. So on that note, Andrew, if you want to get involved in what you're doing and learn more about what the approach you're taking, what's the best way for them to find out?
100%. So first port of call would go to PlaySafeID.com. We've got videos on what we're doing. We've got information. We've got FAQs. Also, within our blog, you can see I've done in-depth interviews with XPB, Geeky Pastimes, a bunch of kind of content creators and streamers and stuff. They range from half an hour to an hour, where they ask me a load of really, really hard questions about everything to do with PlaySafeID, and I go into detailed answers with them. So there's high-level surface information on the website, and if you want to dive deeper, there's video content, there's written content, whatever your flavor is, you can dive in. We also have our Discord available on the website, so if you have any questions, you want to reach out, you can ask questions on our Discord. There's a contact form on the website. You can reach out as well. So we're trying to engage with the community and anyone that has questions as much as possible, because the feedback's super helpful. And we just want to educate people on what our mission is and what our story is. So we're doing our best to do that. But yeah, PlaySafeID.com.
When does the actual act come into force?
The deadline is July the 24th. So literally in 3 weeks as of today. Yes. So I don't think the fines will hit. Yeah. So I don't think the fines will hit, but I think the deep down dive will start to happen from Ofcom. They'll start noticing and taking action.
Exactly. On that note, thank you very much for this. And so I hope you've enjoyed that. I think you found that interesting and useful. I think this is a profoundly complicated and difficult issue. I don't know if we have all of the potential risks and issues identified. I don't think the industry knows if they have all of the final risks and issues identified. And hopefully we've hinted at some of the areas where we think there will be concerns, that we think there might be some challenges. But at the end of the day, I think what we all know is that we want to have an environment where people can enjoy games safely and comfortably, to be able to compete with people knowing that what they're getting is what they're expecting to get, and that we can create experiences that we can trust that we're going to have a good time, and that people around us aren't going to be suffering from bullying or more offensive behavior or material. So at the end of the day, we want to have great experiences, but what we don't want to do is to create barriers that make everybody at more risk. And I think this is where the biggest challenges are occurring, and it's why I'm loving what Andrew's team are trying to do, and why it's interesting for me personally. At the end of the day, though, you as a developer need to think about what this means to you and what impact it's going to have on you. So let's talk about it. Come and join the Discord. Gamedev Local has a great Discord where we have these kind of conversations. But obviously, if you enjoyed it, great. Say so, like, subscribe, share, follow, all that kind of stuff. If you disagree with what we're saying, please come and talk to us. And of course, remember, this is not legal advice. This is just two people talking about an area we are deeply committed to seeing improvements happening.
100%.
And on that note, Andrew, thanks again and goodbye. And this has been your Game Dev Local.